Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Game Week 6 planned transfers video. And the idea really for this video is to sort of decompress a little bit from a very bad game week that a lot of managers have faced and sort of just think about what my transfer plans are going forward, what the priorities are for myself. And ultimately, we're arriving at a juncture where I think Game Week 5 actually wasn't so bad for my team. Now, of course, I was very fortunate because I got 44 points. Didn't get the keeper right, of course. Turner got 2 points versus Pickford's 3. Very inconsequential. My free transfer, for example, actually probably made my team worse. So I have now Udogi, who's not going to be useful for game week 6 and 7. But the idea, of course, with going with Udogi was just to punt on the Sheffield United game, knowing that I could go this week into a Newcastle player. Now, instead, obviously, what happened was Newcastle kept a clean sheet. So the opportunity to go for Trippier this week was also present in Game Week 5, but I decided to go Udogi. Just thought there was a bit more upside there. He himself was actually close to a decent game where he could have got into bonus points. Let's say if it, continued as it was until, let's say, Richarlison and Kulusevski's heroics saved the game. But, it is what it is. And of course, Tottenham deserved to concede as well. And ultimately, if I didn't make a transfer, I suppose I could have actually done better anyways, because I would have had Saliba and Gusto and Chilwell now obviously looking like a problem. So when I sort of review on the team, yes, of course, a couple of problems arise. Chilwell is a problem now. The commentators themselves actually mentioned that he had a knock. Now, I don't actually think that's necessarily true because I don't think Pochettino made any reference to the knock at all. And in my opinion, if the knock was actually, significant, I think he would have mentioned it anyways, right? Because you don't really want to, if let's say you interpret Chilwell as one of Chelsea's leading players and someone who deserves to play every game, a manager would simply just explain the situation. And the fact that he didn't sort of leads me to think that maybe Chilwell's place in the team is not as nailed as we think. And we already know that because he's gotten some very early substitutes. And with Cole Palmer fit, with Mudryk obviously playing the game, but Pochettino not being so high on his performance, there's a little seeds of doubt in terms of whether Chilwell can actually find himself starting next week versus Aston Villa. But also we know that he can be a very early substitute. And so actually when I compare across the board to someone like Malo Gusto, if let's say Chilwell is actually to slot back into the left back position and maybe the wingers are actually instead Palmer and Sterling, just because maybe Mudryk doesn't seem to be, the flavor of the month for Pochettino after this recent game, then ultimately maybe 60 minutes of Chilwell isn't great, and you never know. Chilwell could be benched again. So that is my concern. And I do think Gusto obviously being at such a cheap price and Chilwell being a lot more of an interesting transfer because there's a bit more upside in double game week 7 for me to sort of play around my budget is something that I actually quite like. So for now, I actually think that Chilwell is probably going to be a priority transfer out for me. The alternative is actually looking at someone like Saliba because in the immediate future, he does have some very tough games. The only good one really being that Bournemouth game in game week 7 where he's going to be playing away from home. Now, of course, they looked exquisite away from home versus Everton. Everton really didn't challenge them. And if anything, it was the easiest clean sheet of the weekend for Arsenal to actually pick up. But ultimately, of course, we know that Saliba isn't the most interesting in terms of being a goal threat, isn't the most interesting in terms of being someone who actually gets onto the ball as much as someone like Zinchenko, especially the way Zinchenko plays. You can see, of course, Zinchenko crept into bonus points as well. Saliba was also 1 bonus point away from Zinchenko, but usually you'd probably back Zinchenko to be higher up in bonus points just due to how involved he is, particularly in advanced areas. And you can even see some set piece actions actually including Zinchenko being that final man to shoot, which is something that I even saw last season, which Arsenal have continued to bring through to this year now that Zinchenko is fit and ready to play. So that's an immediate thought. It's either Saliba out or Chilwell out for me because the defense on paper next week isn't great. Estupiñán obviously comes back into the team, which is something we expected. However, Gusto doesn't have the best of fixtures. Still probably want to play him versus Aston Villa at home. However, more so than I would say, let's say Saliba versus Tottenham at home, just because I'm still concerned that Tottenham will quite easily score. And Trippier, I think, is the transfer in, right? Because Trippier just has a good game on paper versus Sheffield United away. And even, of course, if Sheffield United score, you're still looking at Burnley at home right after that. So 2 perfect fixtures back to back for this Newcastle team. And why not just get the talisman of this Newcastle team, considering I have so much money in the bank, 2.6 right now. So those are my sort of immediate thoughts in terms of my defense. In terms of my midfield, I think the way I see it really is, yes, of course, Salah is hauling nonstop, but is it easy for me to go into Salah? And the reality is it's not, right? I only have 1 free transfer for next week. Salah is a 2 free transfer move. Fernandes and Rashford are probably the players to leave the team to actually get Salah if I was to force Salah in this week. And I'd probably have to do something like Chilwell plus Botman, or sorry, Chilwell into Botman, and then let's say Rashford into Salah. Now, actually, Rashford, in my opinion, looked good in the Brighton game. And of course, a lot of people are talking about how selfish he was. But even if you believe that, it doesn't really matter. That's actually good for FPL, right? So when we're looking at the fixtures, I would also say when you're reevaluating this game week and you don't own Salah, don't immediately have FOMO in terms of your lack of owning of Salah, because this fixture for Game Week 5, Wolves away, compared to, let's say, Brighton at home, I would still say that it would have much favored other midfielders this week. For example, the Tottenham midfielders that I don't have in my team, Maddison and Son, had a much better fixture. So I was already considering this game week to be a bad game week. And the fact that I've gotten away with it, in a sense, with a very small red arrow, is something that I'm happy to take early doors. And a lot of elite managers, a lot of engaged managers have suffered a little bit more than me. And that's because of the front line. And we'll talk about that in a second. But actually, now you're staring at some very, very good United games. And you're looking at things like Burnley away, Crystal Palace at home, and even Brentford at home. So that's something I really like, and I don't think there's really a need to overreact to this. And I think this is a good time to actually enjoy our Man United midfielders for the next few weeks until really, let's say, Game Week 9, when Salah has basically a prime run of fixtures. Now, of course, you can say that Salah's fixture proof and you can go straight to Salah if you want, but people blank. Erling Haaland blanks as well. So a lot of people thinking about, let's say, Haaland blanking Game Week 2. You could even argue that he could be a transfer out. There are some managers who actually want to do that. And I myself am not sort of in that camp yet, but I'm also not immediately ready to jump ship to Salah when he has a couple tough fixtures, including, let's say, Brighton away, which is going to be an impending game. Even the West Ham game could be arguably quite tough. So that's sort of my opinions right now. I think Sterling as well actually had a good game on paper. When you actually look back at the Bournemouth game, Jackson didn't really have any good chances. Yes, of course, he absolutely blasted something into the stands, but it wasn't really a good chance whatsoever. Sterling was actually the one who had better chances, even a great free kick as well outside of the box where he could have easily scored. As far as the forwards, though, if we just move on to that, I mean, I'm looking at a team where I'm owning Haaland and Alvarez, so I'm very happy with the forwards. But ideally, I actually have some space with a little bit more money in the bank if I even make the Chilwell to Trippier move, given that I have 2.6 million to actually get a third forward. I could even go for Pedro, back into Pedro, or I could just simply go for a double Game Week 7 player. Now, Lal Foster has just gotten a red card, which of course was absolutely hilarious. I believe I tweeted that he could be our double Game Week player, and then 10 minutes later he gets a red card. So really our options are restricted to Morris, but we know he's the penalty taker and he's an interesting option. Not that sold on, let's say, a Burnley player just because they have to face Newcastle as well. So that's the sort of upside with Morris. I do think he has got a good fixture on paper, and in Game Week 7, we can definitely think about bringing him in. But in the immediate term, I've got a bad defense on paper for Game Week 6. So let's actually try and figure out how to sort that out with my sort of transfer plans. Just looking here on the sort of Fantasy Football Hub website, I have an opportunity here, in my opinion, to actually go into Trippier as soon as Game Week 6, as I mentioned. I've decided to go out of Chilwell just because Chilwell, I really can't guarantee his minutes, and it's either going to be me playing Gusto or me playing Saliba. Now, intuitively, I think Aston Villa at home is probably still a little bit safer of a clean sheet, so I actually like going for Gusto over Saliba. And look, a lot of the field own some Spurs midfielders, and I just don't really back the Arsenal clean sheet here. I think Spurs have been a very threatening team. They have a deep bench when it comes to attack now as well, and it's concerning. So I would much rather play Gusto. So I would probably do that. The midfield, as I said, is perfectly fine. A lot of the players have good fixtures. Maybe not Sterling. You can argue that he can be moved elsewhere, but for now, I think I'll be keeping him. The fixtures are still good, and I don't own Jackson. I think Jackson's probably more of a priority transfer out for most. I don't have that situation or that problem, so Chilwell will be the transfer out for me. And therefore, I'll be owning Haaland and Alvarez, and I'll be captaining Haaland. So that's a quite simple game week on paper. Also, when we talk about, let's say, Pickford, yes, of course, Pickford looks terrible, but then at least the next two fixtures are really, really good for Pickford. Luton Town at home and Bournemouth at home are undeniably good games. And even when we actually look at, let's say, Goodison Park and Arsenal, I mean, Arsenal actually were very, very fortunate to score. Their expected goals created versus Everton was very, very poor. So I would actually say this is a good opportunity to actually keep Pickford, suffer the Brentford away game in Game Week 6, and then actually just move on with life. Because I don't really want to be making another keeper transfer into, let's say, a Luton keeper or a Burnley keeper. It doesn't make too much sense to me. It's probably too short-termist and too few rewards for someone like Pickford, who actually finally has two great fixtures. Now, we've seen some good fixture Um, we've seen some good fixtures for Pickford so far, and he's failed to deliver, and he's flattered to deceive. But I still think it makes sense to hold players for good games. And as I've been saying, goalkeepers really give you the least avenue into points, right? We saw a super haul from Leno, the 12 pointer, but since then it's really been boring. In fact, Sanchez actually got 10 points, but would you be rating Sanchez as a keeper right now after watching Chelsea's performance versus Bournemouth? He actually had to pull off a masterclass to keep a clean sheet there. So it's quite tough, and clean sheets are quite hard to get and buy this season. So you always want to go with, let's say, outfield players or even defenders at least who actually have a bit of an attacking upside. And Trippier is definitely that. So I think, for example, the upgrade from, let's say, Chilwell to Trippier is much larger than, let's say, Pickford to Flecken, where Flecken, I think, has a good fixture this week. So those are my immediate thoughts in Game Week 6. Game Week 7 is interesting. So now I've got a free transfer. The game week rating isn't particularly good. I think I do have an opportunity to move into Morris, so I can probably switch, let's say, Taylor in my team into Morris, and then I can optimize my team. So after optimizing my team, I've got Morris in the team, Sterling first bench, which I'm happy to do, but that actually still rectifies the team a little bit because ultimately you're just getting so many more expected points in two very good games for Morris. As I said, he is the penalty taker. You could even consider, let's say, captaining him over Haaland if you want to, but I probably wouldn't do that. So this is a good opportunity here to actually own someone who will be a little bit of a differential. I think not many people can actually, let's say, afford a very strong team within this game week. So I'm happy to, let's say, own Saliba. Aston Villa away isn't the best fixture, but I'll still be playing, let's say, a Stupian in that game. So I'm happy to do so. And hopefully, I mean, I might even have a chance to actually play Gusto because it seems like Reece James won't be back until, let's say, game week 8/9. And as I said, really good Pickford game. So we move on to game week 8. And then in terms of Game Week 8 here, the interesting thing is I think this is, of course, probably an opportunity to roll your transfer. Just because I've got Udogi, who's been sitting on my bench for a while. He'll have a good fixture, so I can play him then. Morris is a very, very good sort of healthy bench player, so when I optimize the team, Estupiñán actually is back into the team. At least he's playing at home. We know he's an attacker. We know Liverpool have been struggling away from home. And once again, Pickford with a good fixture. Trippier, you play reluctantly here, but still, once again, due to being a set-piece threat, it's quite nice to actually own Trippier at times, particularly in a good run of fixtures. And I don't really have anything to do with my team. So I have the opportunity here to maybe move away from Sterling here, and maybe I can actually move into someone like Richarlison. You never know. I mean, he could be starting up top by then, and in game week 8 he could be an interesting transfer. The alternative transfer, I suppose, is actually going for Eze as well. He could be someone who could be quite interesting. Game week 8, Nottingham Forest at home, a perfect game, and then of course a tough game after that versus Newcastle. But still, overall, a good fixtures to jump onto someone like Eze with, and then I've got some money in the bank to play with. The odd thing, of course, when I look at my team is probably that Morris transfer might actually prevent myself from actually going to Maddison or Son. So that's something to think about too. Maybe the Morris transfer is a little bit too aggressive, and so if I don't want to do that, I can think about going back to Game Week 7, maybe playing around with actually not going with Morris whatsoever, and then actually simply just rolling a free transfer in Game Week 7 instead to actually make sure that my Game Week 8 is better, make sure that I have the chance to go for a Spurs midfielder instead. So that's an opportunity too, but those are going to be my immediate plans. Going back to Game Week 6, which is the most important fixture in the short term, as I said, I think I'll be going out of Chilwell or Saliba. I'll need to think about whether we actually get some consistent leaks, maybe some updated information, a press conference from Pochettino confirming Chilwell and, for example, his position in the team from a tactical point of view, and then I can actually move on to Trippier. The alternative, of course, is I just go from Saliba to Trippier, just because Saliba doesn't have the best of fixtures, and as you can see, his best fixture is Game Week 7 versus Bournemouth, where it just doesn't seem like a great fixture anyways, so you don't really expect the ceiling to be particularly high there, and therefore you're happy to, let's say, bin off Saliba because Game Week 8 as well is extremely bad. It's versus Man City. So those are my immediate thoughts for the short term, and ultimately, as I said, I'm going to be Trippier hunting. Yes, of course, if I go for Botman, then there's an opportunity for me to very easily actually just go from, let's say, Rashford to Salah, but I don't really love the move, if I'm being honest, because I do want to capture some immediate upside. As I said with Salah, he's got some tough-ish fixtures until Game Week 9, in my opinion. Yes, of course, he hasn't blanked at all, but I do think this is a good time for the Man United midfielders to do well. We've come through the Arsenal game. We've come through the Brighton game. I do think this is still the time to own them, and I'll probably be persisting with them until Game Week 8/9. And if it looks terrible by then I'll probably just wildcard into Salah. But I still think this is an opportunity to sort of punt into the upside of these Man United midfielders. With Chelsea, I can understand that you've lost the sort of want to actually keep these players, but I think United are still a little bit more of a competent attack than Chelsea, for example. So owning their attackers, especially when Rashford looked particularly good in the Brighton game anyways, is something that I'll likely be doing. And we know Fernandes has effectively farmed some of the weaker teams so far, particularly on underlying stats. So that's something that I'm hoping that he can continue with up until game week 12, where United effectively have a great run. So that's it for the game week plans, and I hope you guys have a wonderful week ahead. I'll be catching you guys tomorrow with a game week 6 preview.